All right, welcome everyone to a new episode of the Roscoe's Wetsuit Neuro podcast. I am your host, Toby Passman. Roscoe's Wetsuit Neuro offers premium brain health coaching to clients globally. You can book a session today at roscoeswetsuitneuro.com, and we will soon be offering applied neuromodulation services, including QEEG brain mapping, transcranial stimulation, EEG neurofeedback, and some other services to clients interested in peak cognitive performance in the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area starting November 2021. So go ahead and check out roscoeswetsuitneuro.com for all of the latest and sign up for our email newsletter. Now on to the show. We have a very special guest today, Liesl Hays. Liesl is a word artist, truth teller, choice maker, and inspirer. For over a decade, Liesl has been facilitating training, mentoring others, and creating development experiences that require people to dig deep. She is an entrepreneur, owner, and human resources consultant. Liesl runs on coffee, to-do lists, and the belief that life begins after you agree to write your own story. Liesl, welcome to the show.
Hi, Toby. How are you? It's good to be here.
I am great. Well, I'm glad to have you here. So, talk to me a little about, just kind of, your upbringing and getting into the sort of career and field that you are now.
So like a lot of entrepreneurs, didn't have like a typical path that I took. And I kind of fell into the things that I was interested in. And that happened very much for me in my career as well. So at a very young age, I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer. And I very much followed like the traditional career trajectory in my life. So I went to college. I majored in political science. And then I decided that I wanted to go to law school until my junior year hit. And I was in a pre-law program. I was ready to take my LSATs. And I was in a constitutional law class and just realized this is not for me. This is not the direction I want my life to head. And so I graduated college very much unsure of where I wanted to go and who I wanted to be, like many of us experience in our lives. And so I took a job at a local health department, helped them with public policy, eventually moved into human resources, and actually had a career there for about 10 years until I had a place in my life where I very much had a personal crisis of self and recognized that what I was doing and the work that I was just spending 60 hours a week focusing on were no longer authentic to who I was as a person. And so in 2016, I opened an inn in downtown Lee Summit, Missouri, which is a suburb of Kansas City. And I also do HR consulting as well, and recently wrote a book. So, like many entrepreneurs, my interests are multifaceted, and I'm very energized by doing different things every single day.
Tell me about the book that you wrote.
So, I wrote a book recently called Broken, Changed, and Rearranged. And this book is actually a self development and a memoir hybrid. And it's really targeted and focused on individuals who are dealing with a personal crisis. And typically, when I talk about broken, changed, and rearranged, the type of crisis that it is it's one that's really self inflicted. And I share my story around how I went through a very difficult time in my life. And then I offer practical tips and support for readers who are also going through a difficult time themselves. And that actually, my ebook is in September, and then it will be on bookshelves in December this year.
Awesome. So is it so sort of from your personal like story and kind of like the I guess the experiential knowledge that you gained?
Definitely. So it starts off with me actually leaving my corporate job in 2016. So I was in a place in my life where I was working 60 hours a week, Toby, And I oftentimes tell people that I was the last mom to pick my kids up at daycare, like on a regular basis. And I remember feeling like half of a person in every single thing that I did. Like every place that I showed up, if I showed up as a mom, I felt guilty for not being at work. When I was working late in the evening, I felt guilty for not showing up for dinner and my husband picking up the kids. So I was spread so thin at that point in my life and very much hit a crisis point. So in the book, it really starts there, that bottom moment for me. And then I walk readers through my personal journey, but then I also encourage them through practical tips and just tricks that I use to support me. I share that with readers in every single chapter.
Awesome. What are some of the things like the biggest sort of takeaways or lessons you feel like kind of looking back that you learned from kind of overcoming your hardships and kind of finding your path?
So, Toby, when I kind of dove headfirst into crisis, it was one of those things for me that I very much recognized I had stopped listening to my deep internal voice. And I had really started to pursue a life that I think was a collection of what everyone else really wanted for me. And I think we all do this at some point in our lives. We make choices. Sometimes they're just one choice at a time that isn't necessarily authentic to who we are. And for me, a collection of those choices really sat between me and the person over here that I really was. And so I think one of the most critical things, especially in self imposed crisis, is for people to really analyze like, what were the steps that I took to get to this place? Because it didn't happen overnight. There were a series of small, seemingly insignificant choices that I believe a lot of people make when they eventually hit a crisis point. And so, one of the most critical things for people to really be able to overcome that is to identify, what were those choices? Were they authentic to who I am? And what is my deep inner voice telling me is the journey and direction that I want to head in? And so I think that was a really critical piece for me in moving through crisis. And then I think the other really important element that I emphasize to people is when you're in crisis, oftentimes you feel totally alone. You think that you are the only person who has ever been through this much of a difficult time. You don't feel like people can relate to you. You don't feel like your story is seen and heard and understood. You feel really alone. And so, in writing the book, what I wanted to do was give other people that best friend that maybe they're afraid of seeking out when they're going through a difficult time. And my goal in this section that I have called From Me to You is for me to just sit down with you, similar to what we're doing now when you're going through a difficult time, and having coffee, talking about our challenges, and making you feel seen, heard, and understood, which I think is something that many of us struggle with when we are, at a rock bottom moment.
So it sounds like sort of a combination of both like inner reflection, listening to that inner voice, along with kind of getting maybe support rather than like advice or specific like guidance as far as what we should or shouldn't be doing, it sounds like.
Well, I have a few of those things too. So, in every chapter, I do talk about here are some things that I did that helped me. Here's the reality, Toby, and we know this. We're all unique, we're all wired in our own way. And there are different things that help other individuals that may not help us. However, my goal is to help you and also finding those voices that speak to you, that you resonate with, and that can help move you forward out of crisis.
Awesome. What are some of the biggest things that you've like like maybe the biggest pieces of feedback that you've gotten from people on the book? Talking about like, them going through their own crises and finding something useful, or like what kind of feedback have you gotten?
So, a lot of the feedback I've gotten is that I feel seen. So, people will say, I oftentimes feel like I'm totally alone in this difficult moment. And the reality is that while all of us experience crisis in our own unique way, there are universal themes. And it helps people be able to say to themselves, okay, like I'm not alone. I can get through this. There are other people who have encountered this universal tie in the world of pain and suffering, and they have survived and they have been successful. And there is a way out of this place in my life. And so, typically, what I hear people say is they feel very seen. And they also really appreciate that as I share my story, it's not just a memoir. It gives them the ability to say, okay, so this is a story she's telling me. But at the end of the day, how do I start applying this in my own life and digging myself out of this crisis? And so those steps and actions that I provide in the book are really helpful for people to start taking action when a lot of the times in crisis, it's like you don't even feel like moving, like just the day to day is hard. Doing the normal human things that we all have to do, like get out of bed and take a shower and go to work or send our kids to school or whatever it is that we do during the day, is a challenge to even just get out of bed. And a lot of people in crisis are just looking for small ways that they can start taking control of their lives again and start taking action versus sitting in the pain that they're in.
And what are some of the other steps? I mean, we kind of mentioned the sort of inner reflection and then kind of seeking seeking others, the support of others. Like what other steps would you say as for someone who's currently in crisis and maybe is sort of stuck there and doesn't see a way out? How else do you recommend people kind of move through to get to the other side?
So I'm going to sound super cliche by using this analogy, but it's important. So I think in crisis, it's so important to focus on the stair and not the entire staircase. So for me personally, when I was at my bottom, I had a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. I had a hard time like putting the motions together to just be a normal functioning human. And so what I did is I would break my day up into small, meaningful steps. So in the morning, when my alarm would ring at 6 o'clock, I would say to myself, Liesl, what's the next thing that you need to focus on? What would like a high functioning human do at this point? Okay, they would get out of bed. And then after I got out of bed, it would be like, okay, what's the next thing that I need to do to make it through this day? Okay, I'm going to go take a shower. And so for me, I created every day was just doing the next thing that I knew was the right thing to do. And that helped me get through minute by minute, hour by hour. I mean, I didn't have a lot of long term plans at that point in my life, but I was able to get through each day, which I think is a win when you're in a really difficult place. And it helped me move forward to get to a place where I didn't have to do that every day. So that's a really big thing in the book and that I share with people when they're going through a hard time, because I think that it breaks it down and it makes it manageable. Because getting through a whole day can feel overwhelming. Getting up and out of bed feels like something I can actually do.
Got it. I saw reading your bio that so in your book you have a chapter called funeral goals. Tell me about funeral goals.
I am not the first self development author to ask you to focus on your funeral. I just want to make that clear. This is something you've probably heard from self development authors before. But let me give you super quick context and how I think about my funeral goals really differently. So, About 3 years ago, I was at my grandfather's funeral in Galveston, Texas. And it's the type of funeral that you want to go to because my grandpa was in his 90s. He lived an extremely full life, and it was really his time. And I'm sitting in the pews, and the entire church is just full of people. And there's this receiving line that is literally out the door of the church for people who want to visit my family and talk about my grandfather. And ultimately, one of the things that I heard in almost every single story that people shared with me that day was that my grandfather always made them feel like they were the most important person when he was with them. When they were in his presence, he gave them his full attention. And I remember that to me was a really powerful statement because we're so distracted in our lives today with social media, with having our phone in front of us all the time that we're not always present. And my grandfather had the ability to sit with people and be fully present with them. So after I left the funeral that day, I started thinking about what the hell do I want people to say about me at my funeral? What matters to me in my life, and what type of legacy do I even want to leave? Again, not the first self-development author to ask you to think about this. However, one of the things that I think is different is that when I'm planning that, I pretend my funeral is going to be in 5 years. So in this moment today, what do I want people to say about me at my funeral? And if I die in 5 years, what are the things I'm going to do now that are going to get me to that place? And so it's kind of morbid, but okay. So my family owns a funeral home. So I'm just a little bit morbid sometimes, but I have to think about my funeral because that's in game for me. That's the place where everything that I've done in this life is shared by the people that I want to impact and the people that I've wanted to love deeply. And so that's how I plan out my goals. And I create new funeral goals all the time.
Can you like share like a couple examples?
Totally. Okay. So I actually focus on what I want people to say about me. So usually I will focus first on my kids. So I have two children, Maddie and Ethan, and I want them to get up and say about me, my mom always encouraged me to be my authentic self. She wanted me to show up and embrace who I was uniquely, and she supported me in that regardless of what that looked like. So for me, one of the core things in my personality is to really support people in living their truest and most authentic lives and their truest, most beautiful stories. And so that really runs as a common theme in everything I do. So for my children, that's what I want them to say about me when they're at their funeral. When my partner is at my funeral, and he always says that he's like going to be there, that he's not going to be at my funeral. He thinks he's going to die before me, but this is 5 years out, so he's going to be there. And what I want him to say about me is the same thing. I want him to say Liesl inspired me to live authentically. She inspired me to be a better person every single day. And ultimately, we were partners, but we uniquely had our own personalities, and we allowed each other to grow in who we were and change together. And those are a couple of examples for me. And then what I try and do is I align the shit that matters to me based on those funeral goals. So I look at my calendar and I'm like, how am I spending my time? Am I spending time regularly with my children, trying to figure out their interests, their hobbies, what matters to them? Am I cultivating a relationship with my partner and also cultivating a relationship with myself to guarantee that I'm healthy so we can grow together? So that's usually when I look at my calendar, I say to myself, am I allotting time to the things that are going to get me to my 5-year funeral goals?
So that's a much different approach than I guess like a lot of people who are just coming at, situations from kind of a place of reactivity and then kind of like the end result and how people view them is sort of just based on like how they were doing like sort of emotionally at the time, right?
Yeah, and Toby, so I get really passionate about this topic. The other thing I think of is it gives us the ability to say no a lot more easily. So a lot of the times I would struggle in my old kind of life with saying no to people. I wanted to help anyone and everyone. That's just kind of who I am in a lot of ways. But I've started asking myself the question when I'm overburdened and overwhelmed and I'm taking on too much, I'll ask myself, like, okay, this is distracting me from my funeral goals. So why am I saying hell yes to this thing when it's not really a hell yes in like my 5-year plan? And that just helps me clarify my intent and it helps me prioritize things. It just makes it a lot easier because it feels like the stakes are high when you ask yourself that question.
Right. Right. Um, what else would you say, besides funeral goals and some of the other things we've mentioned from the book, what other components or chapters have we not discussed yet that you think are really important from the book?
There's a chapter called Crisis Proof Friendships. And I think oftentimes when we are in the thick of crisis, we can't always see the silver lining. And I will tell you, I am definitely not like a rah, rah, rah positivity all the time person. That's not my personality at all. I really believe that as humans, we are meant to feel the full spectrum of emotions because I think that makes us entirely human and beautiful to experience all the things. However, the one chapter where I really focus on some of the things that were positive for me personally in crisis was me learning the people that were really my truest, most beautiful friends. And for me, a lot of people walked out of my life when I was going through crisis, and that's okay. We hadn't created or established strong enough relationship bonds for people to stick with me. Not everyone's going to stick with you when you're going through a difficult time. However, the people who stick by you when you are going through one of the most difficult points in your life, those are your people. And it really helped clarify for me the people that I wanted to spend time with in my life. So while I have made a lot of new friends post crisis, these small group of friends, for me, there's like 5 of them total that stood with me during that time. I will drop anything for them. And it really helped me clarify who those people were. And I do think that's something that we gain in crisis. We learn who those people are, and we can invest more wisely in those people than we probably had before.
I couldn't agree more with that statement. I've had plenty of conversations with friends and family members about that exact thing where it seems like crises seem to really like either bring people, who are sort of, in your circle, a lot closer, as you're saying, or, also as you mentioned, kind of like the people that don't stick around, those people like you may have thought that person was your really good friend, but then something happens and they show that they really don't care, or they're just, well, like why do you think that is, that crises tend to like, you know throw some people off the ship, or cause some people to kind of like, just run away, whereas other people are kind of more like gravitated towards, helping?
I think it's one of two things, at least based on my experience. It could be more. So, based on my experience, I think the first thing is we just didn't establish enough of a relationship with that person to, help them carry you through crisis. I think there's a small subset of people that will walk with you through that. And I think that those people you have built strong relationships with, and there's a lot of relationship capital. I also think the other piece is a lot of the times people don't know what to say when you're going through a difficult time. So I actually had an interview recently with someone who, in the middle of their life, there was an accident and now they're totally blind. And they just talked about the challenges of people just not saying anything because they didn't know what to say. And I think what I oftentimes tell people when they have friends who are going through crisis, the worst thing you can do is not say anything. And I think that people are well intentioned, they just don't know what to say. And so they just don't say anything at all. And then you lose contact with them, you don't do things with them anymore. It becomes the elephant in the room if you do hang out. And so I think it really is either you didn't build enough relationship capital or people just don't know how to respond to your crisis. What do you think?
That's I think you're definitely on to the onto something there with those couple answers. Yeah, I think I don't know, I think some people maybe who yeah, like they don't maybe they wouldn't be able to handle the situation that you're in, so that they sort of like I don't know about consciously or subconsciously sort of get spooked, because it's like they just kind of freak out, but kind of like what you were saying, because really just because they don't know what to do, they don't know how to handle it. Transitioning more kind of into the business realm, like I wanted to ask you, and kind of also connecting like what we've been talking about, but like how do you feel like kind of personal crises and overcoming crises, affect kind of our working lives and our ability to like kind of show up, uh, as entrepreneurs or professionals, and what do you feel like the connection is there?
So I think there are so many connections, but if I had to boil it down, I think one of the most critical things when you're going through a self imposed crisis, if you get to the place where you are ready to make tangible changes in your life to get out of it, you start to recognize that people who are healthy establish priorities in their life and they are boundaried around those priorities. For me personally, how I dug myself into crisis was I tried to be everything to everyone. If you needed me to drop everything last minute, I was your person. If you had a last minute request at work, I I was there for you. You needed help on the weekends, no problem. I'm there. I'll help you move. I'll help you pack up all your things. Like I will be your go-to person. And the reality is you can't be that for everybody. Nobody can be everything to everyone. And so what my personal crisis taught me is that it's so important to have priorities in your life and to set boundaries around those priorities. And, in business, that really transitions for me because at the inn I own specifically, I have people who ask for discounts all the time. Like it's just a normal part of my life, my job. It's not personal. There are a lot of people who ask for discounts in business, but I have learned that I don't discount my services. So I have set very clear ways of how I want to show up for people when I'm serving them in my business. And I made a list and I want to be an individual who is happy to serve you. I want to be there. I want to be on point. I want to be healthy. And in our interactions, I want to be joyful. And one of the ways that I do that is I know what my price is for me to show up that way. And so I create a great experience for individuals who visit the inn by charging what I do and not discounting my services. So I have boundaries very specifically that I have outlined in my business. in an effort to not just be profitable, but also for me to show up the way that I want to for my customers. That transitions into my HR business too. I have a price of entry for my services. And, there are clients who are the right fit and there are clients who aren't the right fit. And that is okay. I think one of the biggest things that we all struggle with as entrepreneurs is, well, I just need to get business. I need people to be in the doors, or I need people to provide services to. But we have to really clarify what we want and how we want to show up. And we can't falter on that. We have to be boundaried to make sure that our business is successful, but also that we are successful, not just from a business perspective, but also from our own personal health perspective and how we want to show up. What about you? Now I'm going to turn it around on you. What do you think have been, as an entrepreneur for you, like the top two most important lessons on how you do business?
Hmm. One of the uh, first thing, like lessons as far as like from crises or just
Yes. Well, but you know what, Toby, I don't know if I'm sure at some point you've been through a crisis. Do you think there are things that carried over or
yeah,
do you,
yeah. I
okay.
mean, one thing I think would be to just like the ability to show up regardless of how you're feeling, and in terms of like, I guess this sort of
So
may
good.
go, it may sort of go against sort of like the, I don't know, I don't want to say go against, but like, I don't know, like I think there's something to just the grit and tenacity of like, just being so strong-willed that, even if you're running on hardly any sleep or you're going through something in your personal life or whatever it may be, if you can like still show up and do, what needs to be done in terms of business, like I think that maybe is one of the biggest things I've learned. Um,
Okay, super quick. That's so
yeah.
solid. Because here's the thing that I think about. We have to, as entrepreneurs, show up every day. Sometimes we don't want to. Sometimes we don't feel like it. It's like when people say to me, "Oh, well, I'm not getting any social media traction." Well, welcome to my life. And you have to show up every day in some capacity for your business. And sometimes you don't feel like it. Sometimes you don't get the response that you want on social media or in clients that you have sent proposals to. But at the end of the day, success really is all about the grit, right? Even though this is the fifth proposal that I've sent out in this week, and only one of the five of these is going to be accepted, it's still showing up and doing those things when you don't want to. And I love that, Toby. And I'm just reiterating that back to you. But you had another one before I so rudely interrupted you. So please tell me the
No,
second.
no, that was a great addition. As far as yeah, I mean, I would say, um, in terms of business, I think like, uh, yeah, I guess like the first one would definitely be digging deep. Um, yeah, I think kind of just like my second one, I guess, would sort of just be building off of that, and like, I guess personal crises have taught me that like situations that I may think like, are going to completely destroy me and like say destroy my ability to, be an entrepreneur or do, business. Like I've somehow like it's taught me that there's some reserve deeper than like what I even thought was there. Like if I'm willing to to sort of like access that, if that makes sense. Like in terms of just, I think we're all capable of really almost anything we set our minds to. So, if the situation's like so difficult that, you know, our minds think like, gosh, I've never been through anything this hard before. I don't think I can handle it. But then you show yourself that you can handle that. I think it like builds a lot of self-confidence.
Totally. One of the ones that I love the most. So the Airbnb CEO, his name's Brian. I can't remember his last name, but he tells this story about starting up Airbnb. And he talks about how every single day before he went to sleep, he was terrified about how he was going to pay the bills. He's like, I didn't know how it was going to work. I was afraid that like I was in so much debt that there was no way out of this hole. And I can relate to this because there was a lot of capital involved in starting our business. But he talks about how every day he just woke up and he would say to himself, I just have to keep going. Like I just have to keep doing the things and know that like I'm doing the right things and that the business is going to be successful. And he's like, and for whatever reason, at the end of the month, it would end up working out. And I think many of us dig deep in that place where we're like, I want to give up. As entrepreneurs, I tell people, I'm like, I think this is a Harvey Specter quote, but he's like, I give up every goddamn day. And it's true. Like, I give up every goddamn day. Like, there are days where I'm just like, why did I do this? What was I thinking? And then I wake up the next morning and I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to keep doing this. I do really love it, but it's hard. And so I think one of the coolest things that we do as entrepreneurs is we find that strength that, like you said, that we didn't even know that we had, but we get up every day and we keep doing the things we know that are going to make us successful until we eventually get there. Hopefully, that's the goal, right?
Right, right. And I think also maybe like tying back with what you were talking about earlier with sort of the funeral goals, as far as like that seems like also sort of applicable when it comes to like a business sort of thing you're talking about, like, if whatever, some small, I don't want to say small, but like if some relatively like small problem like comes across your plate that we sort of tend to like blow out of proportion, and we get all upset because some contract fell through or whatever it may be. But it's like, if you're thinking about like sort of like the bigger picture, the sort of like funeral goals or whatever, it's like, if you were to think about like, oh, like how do I want my business to be, how do I want like the people who are all like the coworkers, the employees of the business, like how would I want them to, describe like the owner of the business, right? Like, I don't know. Does that, like, do you ever think about that, the
You
the
know what,
application of that?
Toby? I don't, but you know what? I should think about that. Like, I super appreciate that because I've never thought about that layer before. Because when you think about how you want your employees to feel about you and what they would say about you, I think that that helps align some clarity in your business. So you just gave me an idea, and I've never thought about that angle before, but I think it's super applicable.
Very cool. What else would you say, as far as like, say if you could go back to kind of speaking to yourself as a young entrepreneur, but like as you were getting started, like what are some of the biggest things that you've learned now that you wish that you would have known back when you were kind of getting going?
Oh, I made a lot of mistakes, a lot of rookie mistakes, as I think many of us make. And, my business was one that did require a lot of working capital to get started. So obviously we had building, we had a SBA loan with a really high interest rate, which I never understand, but neither here nor there. But I think what I would have said to myself is the first thing would be know your numbers. I think a lot of us entrepreneurs are very creative, we're visionaries, we're willing to like take the risk and make the leap when a lot of people aren't comfortable doing that. They have to think through all the implications, which is really an awesome thing about us. But I think sometimes we lack business and financial acumen because we have that kind of visionary just ability and strength. And so for me, I've had to really start to understand my business numbers. I have to look at them every single month. I have to understand what's coming in, what's going out. Do I need to raise my prices? What does the market allow for? What are other people charging, for their properties in the area that are on Airbnb or VRBO? So I think it's really important to know your numbers, understand them at least at a high level and know the health of your business, hire a good accountant, but still understand what your numbers mean. That's what I would have told myself. Like, get it together. You need to dive into this and stop avoiding it. And then the second piece of advice I probably would have given myself is you are not going to be immediately successful, and that's okay. No entrepreneur is immediately successful. It's just we always showcase the success stories, but we don't show the work leading up to becoming Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whoever, right? We don't show the grit and determination that it took to get to that place. And for me, I thought that my business was going to be like immediately successful, and it wasn't. Like most businesses, we lost money for the first 3 years, really. And just wait it out and know that it's normal not to be immediately successful, but keep going and don't quit.
And it
So those would
seems,
probably be the two biggest things.
yeah, no, love it. It seems like with that last point there, it seems like, social media has really kind of like painted this picture of kind of like overnight success, right? Where you're like, you see on YouTube like someone, they're like, I'm 22, and like, they got like all the Lamborghinis and Ferraris, and
Right?
they like, and then you're like, gosh, what am I doing with my life? Like, like, but it's like, I don't know. I think, yeah, like even for those people, like who knows, maybe they've been, maybe they, I mean, if that's actually a reality for themselves, like maybe those are just rented cars or whatever. But if they really do have that, I'm guessing they probably were busting their ass, probably from like their teenage years in order to like get that, right? But it's only
Totally.
documented, like just the people only look at kind of the end success rather than like the hard work that goes into that success.
Totally. And I think we oftentimes, we see the highlight reel on social media. I know we all know that, but we oftentimes see like the end result of years of work. And we forget that most people who reach a certain level of success, there was a lot of hard work involved in that and a lot of grit. Like you said, I love that word.
Yes. Yes. Well, Liesl, I've really enjoyed our discussion today. We're coming up onto the end of the show. But before we wrap up, is there anything, well, I guess in order to wrap up, like, is there anything from what we've discussed so far, anything that you think would be good kind of closing thoughts?
So I like to end on funeral goals because I'm morbid like that. But I want you to just spend some time thinking about what you want someone to say at your funeral. I want you to think about the people who most matter to you and ask yourself, what are they going to say about you? And what do you want them to say about you? And then after you create that, I want you to go back to your calendar, literally micromanage the shit out of your calendar and ask yourself the question, is what I'm prioritizing in my life this week? Just start with 1 week. Don't overwhelm yourself by like looking, multiple weeks out. Start with 1 week and ask yourself if what you're prioritizing is getting you to that end goal. So that's your homework for this week. I don't know. Do guests usually give homework?
Sometimes
It feels
it's
like
more
a
than welcome.
class.
Yes, there'll be a test for all listeners on the beginning of the next episode. So do
Yes.
your
Let me
homework.
know how it goes, Toby. Fill me in, okay?
Absolutely. Well, Liesl, if people want to connect with you or find out and you get your book, like where would you direct them to?
Yes. So if you want to pre-order my book, so you can pre-order it now, go to lieslhays.com/book. And if you want to follow along just on my social media journey and join our community, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Liesl Hays author, or you can find me on Instagram at liesl.hays.
Perfect. And for those listeners who enjoyed the show, go ahead and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Roscoe's Wetsuit. You can also find audio versions of the podcast available on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and just about anywhere else that you can stream audio podcasts. Also, if you guys enjoyed the show, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star Apple Podcast review. That would be super helpful. Liesl, I wanted to really thank you for coming on the show today and sharing your knowledge and expertise. I really enjoyed our conversation.
It was great to chat with you, Toby. Thanks for having me.